Maldives? Just saying the name, you immediately picture it, don't you? Those incredible turquoise waters, the white beaches, paradise, basically.
It really is the image everyone has, pure paradise.
But, what if I told you that under that beautiful surface, there's this deep history, like over 3,000 years deep, full of surprises?
Yeah, it's a history that often gets, well, sort of lost behind the whole luxury tourism image today. But as we dig into our sources for this deep dive, you'll see it's a much more complex and fascinating story.
Exactly. So that's our mission today. We've got some great material, old chronicles, modern research, the works. We want to get past the postcard and really understand what shaped the Maldives.
We're looking at a huge time frame, really, from the very first hints of people living there right up to the very real challenges that Maldives is grappling with now.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. The geography itself seems crucial, right? It's not just pretty.
Oh, absolutely fundamental. I mean, you've got this chain of 11,192 islands spread over 90,000 square kilometers in the Indian Ocean. It's huge.
Wow. Yeah.
But the land, less than 300 square kilometers total. And it's the lowest lying country in the world. That single fact has shaped almost everything. How people got their trade, its vulnerability today, everything.
So who are the first people then? When did they arrive?
Well, the sources suggest major settlements started about 1,000 years ago. But there's evidence pointing possibly way earlier, maybe 2000 BC.
Really?
Yeah. And these first people likely came from different parts of India, north, west, south. So those connections to the subcontinent, they're right there from the very beginning.
Okay, and that ties into the language too, right? We saw mentions of Aryan influence.
Exactly. The Maldivian language, Divi. You can clearly see links to Tamil and Sanskrit. It suggests that early Indo-Aryan languages kind of provided the vocabulary, the structure for what became Divi.
So language links, what other evidence do we have of these early connections? Any artifacts?
Yeah, quite a bit, actually. Archaeologists have found earthenware, pottery with these red and black patterns, very similar to stuff found on the Indian mainland.
Interesting.
And there are Semitic inscriptions, too, which points towards early trade with, Arabic-speaking areas. Plus, and this surprises people, ruins of Buddhist stupas all across the island.
Buddhist stupas. Wow. That feels worlds away from the Maldives we think of today, which is strongly Islamic. Tell us more about that Buddhist era.
It's fascinating because Buddhism wasn't just a brief phase. It was likely there from maybe the 3rd century BC. Think about the trade routes crisscrossing the Indian Ocean back then.
Right, the Maldives was probably a key stop.
Exactly. So missionaries from southern India, trade connections as likely how it arrived and spread, and it stayed for over 1,000 years. These ruins aren't just like interesting finds. They point to a really long period of cultural and religious life before Islam. You have to wonder what subtle influences might even linger from that time.
Over a millennium of Buddhism. Okay, so what caused that huge shift? How did Islam become dominant?
The key year seems to be 1153. Our sources point to the arrival of a figure named Muhammad bin Shahab Barakath al-Ghazi. He's credited with converting the last Buddhist king.
Just like that.
Well, maybe not just like that. But he's the figure associated with establishing a Sunni Hanafi Islamic kingdom. That specific school of Sunni Islam became the foundation for law and society. It was a massive change, really reorienting the Maldives towards the Muslim trading world, Arabia, Persia.
A huge transformation. And that location, right in the middle of the Indian Ocean, must have put it on the radar for colonial powers, too.
Absolutely. Too strategic to ignore. The first major European power to make a move were the Portuguese. They invaded in 1558, took Malé, most of the atolls.
That must have been tough. Did they stay long?
About 8 years. The Maldivians eventually managed to drive them out, which led to a kind of revival of local traditions for a while.
Okay, so independence regained. But then...
Then came the Dutch. In the 17th century, they established a protectorate.
But were they deeply involved? I thought their main focus was elsewhere.
You're right. Their big interest was Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. So their control over the Maldives was relatively light. This actually led the Maldives to look more towards the British for help as their power grew.
Ah, okay. And that eventually led to the British protectorate.
Yes, in 1887. For Britain, it was about securing their interests in the region, especially protecting Ceylon. So they took over foreign affairs and defense.
So a protectorate means Britain handled the external stuff, but the Sultan was still in charge internally. Sort of.
Pretty much. The Maldives kept its internal government, the Sultan stayed, but Britain had the final say on foreign policy and defense. It gave him significant influence without direct rule.
Right. And what happened under British influence? Any major changes?
Well, a couple of key things. The Constitution came in 1932, which was the first time the Sultan's absolute power was limited. You also started to see an English-educated elite emerge.
Ah, and they probably had different ideas about the future.
Exactly. Exposure to global politics, ideas of self-determination. It definitely planted the seeds for wanting more independence and eventually opposition to British control.
So how did they finally get full independence?
World War II was a big factor, weakening the European colonial powers globally. Then there was a treaty in 1948, the Treaty of Friendship and Protection, which gave the Maldives more autonomy. But it was a process. After years of pushing, of negotiation, they finally achieved full independence in 1965.
So not just handed over, but really fought for.
Definitely. Some later accounts might try to spin it as British benevolence, but the records show it was driven by Maldivian aspirations for self-rule.
Okay, 1965, independence. What were those first years like? Smooth sailing.
Not entirely. There was some political instability at first, a new constitution in '53, leadership changes, but then things settled down under President Gayoom, who ruled for 3 decades.
30 years. Wow. What defined that era?
Relative stability, certainly, and significant economic growth. This is when tourism really took off. The first resort opened in 1972. That plus fisheries became the economic engine.
That tourism boom must have changed everything.
Fundamentally, huge source of jobs, foreign money. But it also made the economy very dependent, very vulnerable.
Vulnerable how?
Well, vulnerable to external shocks. Think about the tourism drop after 9/11 or the 2008 financial crisis. And then, more recently, the massive hit from the pandemic in 2019. When tourism stops, the whole economy feels it deeply. It really shows a challenge for a small island nation trying to diversify.
And politically, things didn't stay static either, did they? There was a big shift later on.
A very big shift. In 2008, the Maldives transitioned to a multi-party democracy. That ended President Gayoom's long rule, and Mohammed Nasheed was elected.
The end of an era. Has it been stable since then?
Dynamic might be a better word. It hasn't always been smooth. There have been periods of turmoil, political fragmentation. We even saw a state of emergency declared back in 2022. So it's an ongoing process.
A complex picture then. Economic growth tied to tourism, but also vulnerability and a move to democracy that's still evolving. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about Maldivian society and culture itself. Islam is central, obviously.
Absolutely central. It's the state religion enshrined in the Constitution. Its influence is everywhere. Law, culture, daily life, customs. It shapes pretty much everything.
What does that mean in practice for other beliefs?
Well, the Constitution mentions freedom of thought, but Islam is the state religion. So the public practice of other religions faces significant restrictions. It's very much the defining framework.
But within that framework, there's still a lot of cultural richness, blending different influences.
Oh, definitely. It's a fascinating mix. You see touches of South India, Arabia, Africa, even some European influences here and there. It comes through in the art, music, literature, customs.
Any specific examples?
Think about the beautiful, intricate wood carvings you see on older mosques, or the unique lacquerwork tradition, really distinctive Maldivian craft.
And the food, I imagine it's heavily influenced by the ocean.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's built around coconut, fish, and starches, like mashuni, that's shredded smoked tuna, coconut, onion, chili. Really popular breakfast dish.
Right.
And lots of different fish curries, of course. Preserving fish, drying it, that's also a really old, important tradition.
Now, what about the role of women? Are sources hinted at something maybe a bit different historically compared to nearby regions?
Yeah, this is really interesting. There's historical evidence suggesting women held, well, relatively more prominent positions historically. There were even female sultanas, rulers, and certain traditions, like matrilocal marriage, where the husband moves to the wife's community, were practiced in some areas, which could support women's status and property rights.
But has that changed over time?
Sources suggest that, yes, it has shifted. Factors like the decline of some older traditions and perhaps certain interpretations of Islamic law coming more to the forefront have changed the dynamics. There are ongoing debates now about women's rights in areas like inheritance, family law. So it's complex. The historical prominence you mentioned, based on traditional kinship systems, seems to have eroded somewhat due to these evolving interpretations and societal changes.
Looking ahead, what about the younger generation? What role are they playing?
They're seen as really crucial for the democratic future. This is a generation that grew up with more access to technology, global information. They're often quite vocal about governance, rights, environmental issues. They're connected, and they have aspirations for the country.
And are there specific cultural celebrations that are really important?
Definitely. Many are linked to Islamic traditions, of course. But National Day is a big one, celebrating driving out the Portuguese. Lots of parades, music, traditional stuff. The Prophet Muhammad's birthday is also a major religious and cultural observance.
Okay, and briefly, what about basic services? Education, healthcare. Have there been big improvements?
Significant progress. The education system is mostly based on the British model, teaching in both DB and English. They're always working on improving quality, access, using tech, and healthcare has seen huge strides. Life expectancy is way up, child mortality way down. The National Health Insurance Scheme, ASANDA, was a major step towards universal access.
And how does the Maldives position itself internationally?
It's active in the UN, other bodies. A big focus, understandably, is advocating for peaceful solutions to disputes. But increasingly, and very importantly, it's about raising the alarm globally on environmental issues.
Which brings us squarely to maybe the biggest challenge of all, the environment. Being the lowest lying nation. That sounds incredibly precarious.
It's truly an existential threat. Climate change, sea level rise. These aren't abstract concepts, they're immediate dangers. We're talking beach erosion, coral bleaching from warmer seas, managing waste, the impact of building more resorts and guest houses. The marine ecosystems are incredibly fragile. Local research constantly flags how serious this is.
It sounds overwhelming, yet the Maldives is still here, still functioning, still advocating.
Absolutely. And that's remarkable. Despite the vulnerability, it's achieved a relatively high income for the region, it has a working democracy, and it's become a really powerful voice on the world stage for climate action. They're not just victims, they're pushing for global partnerships, implementing their own plans like marine spatial planning, community programs like Future Maldives.
So when you step back and look at it all, ancient settlers, Buddhism, Islam, the Portuguese, the British, tourism, democracy, and now this immense climate threat,
Yeah.
it's just, wow, so much more than just beaches.
Yeah, the key thing for me is the resilience. This nation, these people, have navigated this incredibly long, complex history. Constant adaptation, absorbing influences, facing huge challenges, yet maintaining a distinct identity.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How that unique geography, being these tiny islands in a vast ocean, and the layers of culture have shaped everything. From those first traders to facing down colonialism to now confronting climate change head on. It's an amazing story of survival.
And it leaves you with a pretty heavy question.
All right.
Given how vulnerable they are, what does the future hold for this incredible place? And maybe more importantly, what can the rest of us learn from their story, their resilience, their experience on the absolute front line of the climate crisis? It's something we all need to think about.